The courtroom echoed with a thunderous gavel strike, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. The guarded survivor sat rigidly, eyes wide, as the judge declared a verdict that no one saw coming. Sarah said, "This changes everything. We cannot stay silent." The warm comforter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his calm words slicing through her panic. Daniel said, "Stay strong. Justice is not always lost in this room." The reluctant firestarter leaned forward, restless and sharp-eyed, unable to mask their unease. Emily said, "They know more than they admit, I can feel it." That Anchor's jaw tightened, his composure cracking for a fleeting second. Michael said, "We will uncover what lies beneath, but tread carefully." In the back row, the Velvet Blade observed silently, their eyes unblinking, a faint smirk suggesting control beyond the verdict. The atmosphere grew heavier, whispers darted across benches, and the haunting memory of the one who vanished pressed into every corner of the room. The sound of the gavel still echoed, as if reminding them that justice had already slipped away. The silence outside the courthouse was deafening, the crowd dispersing into fragments of disbelief. Sarah stood on the steps, her breath shallow as if the air itself betrayed her. She whispered, "He's gone, and no one will speak the truth." Daniel moved closer, voice steady but carrying the weight of unspoken doubts. Daniel said, "We cannot accept the verdict at face value. There's something deeper here." Emily stood at the edge, her sharp eyes scanning the passing faces with suspicion. Emily said, "They are hiding something, I know it." Michael lingered near the railing, calm yet calculating, scanning for any hint of betrayal. Michael said, "Stay quiet, but keep watching everyone." The Velvet Blade emerged through the heavy doors, untouched by the tension, their gaze sweeping across the shaken group. A shadow fell across Sarah's face, as the wind carried echoes of the gavel's strike, haunting her with its finality. The night had not yet fallen, but the darkness was already settling in their hearts. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the unread letter before her glowing faintly in the lamplight. She traced its edges with trembling fingers, whispering, "Why did you leave? And why can't I face the truth?" Daniel called her phone, his voice a steady tether. Daniel said, "Don't drown in silence, Sarah. We need you sharp." She replied, her voice breaking, "Every memory drags me deeper." Emily, restless, sneaked through empty streets, searching shadows for answers no one offered. She muttered, "They will regret underestimating me." Michael studied case files in solitude, his pen tapping as if wrestling with loyalty and guilt. He said quietly, "One mistake could bury us all." In a distant corner of town, the Velvet Blade's silhouette loomed against the window, every movement precise, as if orchestrating unseen strings. The absence of the lingering memory filled the air, a haunting reminder that truth was never simple. The next morning, fog rolled over the quiet streets as Sarah stood by the memorial wall, her hand pressed against the faded photo of the lingering memory. She whispered, "Your absence still breathes in every corner." Daniel joined her, eyes heavy, voice low. Daniel said, "The answers are buried, but not beyond reach." Emily crouched nearby, sketching the wall with urgent strokes. Emily said, "It feels alive, as if secrets are etched here." Michael watched from the street corner, tension tightening his jaw. He muttered, "We are being watched. Stay careful." Across the road, the Velvet Blade leaned on a polished car, expression unreadable, their presence too deliberate to be ignored. The fog thickened, muffling sound, turning the world ghostly. The silence stretched, broken only by Sarah's unsteady breathing as she pressed her forehead against the cold stone. As dusk approached again, Sarah sat on a bench overlooking the river, her reflection fractured by ripples. She whispered, "Every answer slips through my hands." Daniel sat beside her, steady voice pulling her back. Daniel said, "The truth is not gone, it is only buried." Emily paced along the water's edge, restless energy radiating. Emily said, "We have to dig where no one dares to look." Michael lingered behind them, silent sentinel, with eyes sharp on the shadows. He thought, trust is fragile, and it will soon shatter. The velvet blade appeared at a distance, outlined by the setting sun, gaze fixed on them with unnerving stillness. The lingering memory's voice seemed to echo from the waves, pulling at Sarah's chest with invisible weight. The river carried away the daylight, leaving only darkness to settle in its place. Sarah walked through the dim hallway of her home, clutching the unread letter as if it held her last thread of control. Her whisper broke in the silence. "You should be here. But you vanished." Daniel sat at the kitchen table, papers spread across the wood, his tone steady. Daniel said, "The truth is buried, but it bleeds through cracks." Emily leaned against the wall, sketchbook under her arm, eyes sharp. Emily said, "I hear voices in silence, echoes that don't belong here." Michael stood by the window, his gaze on the dark street outside, jaw tight with suspicion. Michael said, "Every step we take, someone is already ahead of us." The velvet blade's presence lingered in the shadows of their thoughts, never seen yet felt, like smoke curling in a sealed room. The memory of the vanished face pressed harder, as if every wall of the house carried its reflection. Sarah lowered herself to the chair, her hand shaking as she placed the letter on the table. The paper untouched, but heavy with truth untold. The group gathered at a quiet diner on the edge of town, neon lights flickering outside like false promises. Sarah whispered, "Everywhere I turn, I see pieces of him." Daniel leaned forward, voice low but unshaken. Daniel said, "Memories are not ghosts, they are clues if we let them guide us." Emily scribbled rapidly in her sketchbook, restless energy radiating. Emily said, "I'm drawing what I saw. Someone was near the courthouse who shouldn't have been." Michael stirred his coffee without drinking, his silence sharp as a blade. He muttered, "We cannot trust anyone, not even each other." The velvet blade entered briefly, their reflection gliding across the diner's glass, never stopping, never speaking, but heavy in meaning. The lingering memories photo appeared on the wall-mounted TV in a news clip, the anchor's voice muted, but the face unmistakable. Sarah's hands froze, eyes trembling as if the world itself had paused. The diner's hum grew louder, echoing the sound of secrets closing in. Rain poured heavily as Sarah walked beneath her umbrella, the streets glistening with fractured reflections. Her voice cracked, "The world keeps moving, but I'm trapped in the same night." Daniel caught up, rain soaking his blazer, voice steady as he said, "You carry the wound, but you're not alone." Emily darted ahead, her laughter sharp against the rain, masking unease. Emily said, "The storm hides us, but it also hides them." Michael followed behind, his gaze darting to alleys, as if expecting betrayal at every corner. Michael said, "Eyes are on us even when the streets are empty." From a balcony above, the velvet blade stood watching, untouched by rain, expression unreadable, their silence louder than thunder. The haunting presence of the lingering memory hung in the water's reflection, a youthful face appearing for a blink before rippling away. Sarah stopped suddenly, hand pressed to her chest, feeling the weight of absence as rain blurred her tears into the storm. Inside a cluttered archive room, Sarah flipped through dusty files, her breath uneven. She whispered, "His name was here once, but it has been erased." Daniel leaned over the desk, lantern light casting shadows across his tired face. Daniel said, "They rewrote the story, but we can find the missing lines." Emily perched on a filing cabinet, sketching what she saw, her restless voice cutting the silence. Emily said, "Even the dust tells lies, someone touched these boxes recently." Michael shifted through folders in the corner, expression stern, his thoughts unspoken. He muttered, "Erasure is more dangerous than a lie. It means someone owns the truth." Sarah's trembling fingers landed on a torn photograph of the lingering memory, edges burnt, face partly missing. The velvet blade's shadow slipped across the frosted window, never entering but always near. The silence grew unbearable, as if the files themselves carried screams no one could hear. By the riverbank at dawn, fog curling over the surface, Sarah sat on a damp bench, the unread letter finally in her lap. Her voice trembled. "I am terrified of opening what binds me to the truth." Daniel stood nearby, hands in pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. Daniel said. The fear is the weapon they count on, but courage breaks chains. Emily tossed pebbles into the fogged water, restless energy thinly veiling her worry. Emily said, "The silence of the river is louder than screams." Michael paced behind, his jaw locked, his mutter low. Michael said, "If we uncover it, we must be ready for the weight it carries." The velvet blade appeared distantly on the bridge, figure still and deliberate, watching without motion. The lingering memory's reflection rippled faintly in the water, as if the fog itself carried fragments of their presence. Sarah closed her eyes, gripping the letter tighter, knowing dawn only sharpened the shadows. The police station buzzed with static tension. Papers shuffled, radios cracked, and the clock ticked louder than it should. Sarah stood near the desk, gripping the unread letter, her voice low. Sarah said, "They erased him from files, but they can't erase his blood from the earth." Daniel leaned over the officer's desk, voice even but edged. Daniel said, "Show us the logs from the night he vanished. No detail is too small." Emily darted around the room, her sharp eyes tracing every shadow. Emily said, "Someone's fingerprints are on these pages. I can almost see them." Michael stood near the door, shoulders broad, voice measured. Michael said, "Watch their eyes. The lies live in hesitation." The velvet blade's name flickered in the reports, never spoken but always implied. The lingering memory haunted every corner, a ghost whispering that the truth had been stolen long before they entered. The group gathered in a dim parking garage, echoes of dripping water surrounding them. Sarah whispered, "This place feels wrong, but he was seen here last." Daniel unfolded a map under the flickering light. Daniel said, "Every route leads back to the river, but this is the gap they want us to miss." Emily crouched beside a car, her pencil scratching furiously as she sketched tire tracks. Emily said, "These wheels tell more truth than the police." Michael leaned against a pillar, eyes darting into shadows. Michael said, "Someone is listening. We're not alone." In the distance, footsteps echoed faintly, deliberate, controlled. Sarah clutched the letter closer to her chest, as if the paper itself could shield her. Above them, the velvet blade's figure moved briefly along the upper railing, a phantom presence. The lingering memory pulsed like an echo, as though the air itself had carried their last breath here. Inside the abandoned train yard, rusted tracks stretched into silence. Sarah's breath misted in the cold air as she murmured, "He walked these rails. I can feel it." Daniel bent down, brushing dust from a broken lantern. Daniel said, "This was staged. Someone wanted to erase his path." Emily hopped onto a rail, balancing while sketching graffiti on the walls. Emily said, "The walls speak louder than the silence. Someone left warnings here." Michael scanned the shadows, his jaw stiff. Michael said, "A meeting happened here, but not everyone walked away." A sudden clang of metal echoed, sharp and deliberate, making Sarah flinch. Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the far end of the yard. High above, the velvet blade stood on a platform, arms folded, watching without motion. The lingering memory's faint laughter echoed in Sarah's mind, twisting the silence into something unbearable. The riverbank at night was alive with sirens in the distance, red and blue lights flickering faintly across the water. Sarah crouched near the mud, whispering, "He left something here. I can feel it under the earth." Daniel shone his flashlight over the ground. Daniel said, "Search deeper. They buried evidence in plain sight." Emily knelt, hands dirty, sketching quickly as she uncovered fragments of cloth. Emily said, "This fabric doesn't belong to him. It belongs to them." Michael kept his back to the river, eyes scanning the tree line, muttering, "They're closing in. We need to move fast." Sarah's hand struck metal buried beneath soil, her gasp cutting through the silence. Daniel crouched closer, voice firm, careful. This was meant to be found too late. On the opposite bank, the velvet blade's silhouette glimmered briefly in the flashing lights, before vanishing into the fog. The lingering memory's image rippled in the water, haunting and fragile. A warehouse deep in the industrial district became their next stop, its silence oppressive, dust floating in shafts of moonlight. Sarah whispered, Every wall here knows what we don't. Daniel's flashlight beam caught scratches carved into steel. Daniel said, "He marked this place before they took him." Emily traced the carvings with her finger, sketchbook balanced against her knee. Emily said, "These are warnings, layered with fear." Michael prowled the shadows, his voice low. Michael said, "We're not safe here. The air smells like a trap." A sudden metallic clang echoed overhead. Sarah froze, gripping her letter. Daniel turned sharply, eyes catching movement in the rafters. The velvet blade stepped into the light above, gaze unwavering, every detail too composed. The lingering memories whisper lingered in Sarah's ears, urging her forward even as the walls closed in with dread. The group returned to the diner, but the hum of neon now felt hostile, each flicker echoing betrayal. Sarah whispered, "I can't shake the feeling one of us has already chosen the other side." Daniel sat rigidly, voice calm but laced with warning. Daniel said, "Trust is fragile, and someone has cracked it already." Emily flipped through her sketchbook, eyes sharp with accusation. Emily said, "I saw him near the river. Michael, you weren't where you said you were." Michael's jaw clenched, his voice cold. Michael said, "I protect you more than you know. Don't mistake silence for guilt." The velvet blade entered suddenly, leaning against the counter as if he owned a room. His eyes lingered on Sarah with quiet menace, as if daring her to open the letter. The lingering memories photo flickered again on the muted TV, but this time the caption read, "Declared missing, no longer under review." The shock froze everyone in place. Later, in Sarah's living room, the air was heavy with distrust. She placed the unopened letter on the table, its weight unbearable. Sarah said, "This has waited for years, but if I read it, everything changes." Daniel leaned forward, voice steady yet firm. Daniel said, "The truth may destroy us, but it will also set our path." Emily shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward Michael. Emily said, "Secrets already burned holes in us. Maybe this is the final fire." Michael stood near the window, shadowed, his words sharp. Michael said, "Don't open it, unless you're ready to bury everything you thought you knew." Outside, a car idled too long, headlights slicing through curtains. The velvet blade's silhouette appeared briefly in the light, his control tightening around them. The lingering memory's voice seemed to hum faintly in Sarah's ears, urging her hand closer to the seal. At the old church, candles flickered weakly against cracked stone walls. Sarah's voice trembled. "He prayed here. I remember his songs." Daniel stepped closer to the altar, his tone grave. Daniel said, "If he left signs, they're not prayers, they're warnings." Emily wandered through the pews, fingers tracing carvings. Emily said, "These marks aren't accidents. Someone carved initials here recently." Michael's voice cut through sharply. Michael said, "Not everyone here is searching for truth. Some of us hide it." The tension rose, each glance cutting deeper than words. Suddenly, Sarah noticed the initials were her own, carved beside those of the lingering memory. Her breath caught, fear and betrayal clashing. In the doorway, the velvet blade appeared, face calm, as though waiting for them to realize what he already knew. The lingering memory's laughter echoed faintly from the rafters, unsettling and hollow. The archive revealed more than they expected. Sarah whispered, "These files weren't erased, they were moved." Daniel flipped pages, his voice low but steady. Daniel said, "Every path leads back to the same name, hidden in plain sight." Emily leaned against the wall, sketching furiously. Emily said, "That name keeps circling us like it wants to be found." Michael slammed a file shut, voice tight with anger. Michael said, "That's because someone in this room is feeding him everything." Sarah froze, her eyes shifting between Daniel and Michael, the doubt spreading like fire. Then a single paper slipped from Daniel's hand. Photographs of Sarah and the lingering memory together, dated days before the disappearance. Her breath shattered, hands trembling. The velvet blade's laughter echoed faintly through the hall, though he was nowhere in sight. The past itself was now the enemy. Night fell over the bridge, fog curling thick over the water. Sarah clutched the photograph, her voice breaking. Sarah said, "He was with me that night, but I don't remember this picture." Daniel stood firm, voice calm but edged. Daniel said, "Memories can be rewritten, and someone is holding the pen." Emily stared at the fog, voice soft but piercing. Emily said, "The truth isn't gone, it's stolen, and we're chasing its shadow." Michael's voice cut, steady but sharp. Michael said, "Then we stop running and turn to face the thief." From the fog, the velvet blade emerged slowly, his posture calm, his gaze fixed on Sarah. He said nothing, yet his silence spoke louder than confession. The lingering memory's faint reflection rippled beneath the bridge, as though watching, waiting, judging. The truth was no longer hidden. It was in their midst, waiting to destroy or set them free. The warehouse became a battlefield of silence, every shadow charged with menace. Sarah clutched the photograph, her whisper shaking. Sarah said, "You made me believe the past was broken, but you forged it." Daniel's voice cut through with steel. Daniel said, "Every lie points to you, Blade. Every path leads back here." Emily stepped forward, trembling yet defiant. Emily said, "You stole more than a life. You stole their memory." Michael stood between them, gaze unreadable, his silence a blade of its own. Michael said, "Sometimes betrayal wears loyalty's mask, and sometimes truth must bleed." The velvet blade smirked, his presence towering without motion, as though the walls themselves bent toward him. The lingering memory lingered in every corner, the photo trembling in Sarah's hands, as if alive. The moment cracked like glass ready to shatter. The confrontation erupted. Sarah cried, "You rewrote my life. You buried me with him." Daniel moved closer, voice steady but burning. Daniel said, "We end this tonight, no more shadows." Emily pulled out her sketchbook, tearing a page free. Emily said, "I drew you where you thought no one saw. You were always there." Michael stepped forward, voice sharp with betrayal. Michael said, "I guarded your lies, Blade, but I won't guard them now." The velvet blade tilted his head, eyes gleaming. He said softly, "Truth is not discovered, it is given, and I never gave it to you." The warehouse walls trembled, as if echoing the weight of his words. The lingering memory's image flashed in Sarah's mind, the laughter twisted into a scream. The breaking point had arrived. The fight was not with fists but with revelations. Sarah shouted, "Every memory I carried was not mine. You planted them." Daniel's voice thundered. Daniel said, "Your silence was the weapon, but now your mask cracks." Emily's voice quivered but held strength. Emily said, "I drew your shadow in every corner and now the drawing speaks truth." Michael turned fully, gaze locked on Blade. Michael said, "I chose the greater good once, but I won't choose you again." The velvet blade's smile faded, his stillness breaking into menace. His voice was low. He said, "You think you fight for justice, but you are only fighting yourselves." Sarah raised the photograph high, her hands trembling as if it burned. The lingering memory's face stared back, no longer blurred, demanding justice. The storm outside raged, thunder shaking the steel beams. Sarah said, "I carry his silence, but I will no longer carry your lies." Daniel's tone cut sharp. Daniel said, "Truth is no longer yours to hold." Emily's pencil snapped in her hand, voice breaking. Emily said, "You cannot erase what was never yours to begin with." Michael stepped into the light, his confession spilling. Michael said, "I delivered pieces to you, Blade, but I deliver you nothing now." The velvet blade's eyes narrowed, his calm cracking into fury. He said, "Justice bends to me, not to you." Sarah ripped the photograph in half, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The lingering memory's face split across paper, but their presence grew sharper, filling the space with demand for truth. The climax peaked as silence fell heavier than thunder. Sarah whispered, "He's not gone, he is here in us." Daniel placed a hand firmly on her shoulder. Daniel said, "Together, we carry the truth beyond your chains." Emily raised her broken sketchbook, her voice fierce. Emily said, "Every shadow tells on you, and the walls themselves remember." Michael's voice was firm, unyielding. Michael said, "Your reign ends tonight, Blade." The velvet blade exhaled slowly, gaze hollow, his last words a hiss. He said, "Truth will eat you alive." The warehouse lights flickered violently, sparks falling like fire. Sarah dropped the torn photo into the dirt, the fragments glowing under the sparks. The lingering memory's voice seemed to echo through the walls, not a scream, not a cry, but a whisper that demanded justice at last. The storm had passed, but the silence it left was heavier than thunder. Sarah stood at the warehouse doorway, her clothes torn, eyes hollow, voice faint. Sarah said, "We broke the chains, but the truth still feels like a prison." Daniel placed his coat over her shoulders, his tone steady but pained. Daniel said, "We are free of his lies, but freedom demands what justice could not give." Emily sat on a broken crate, sketchbook limp in her lap, her words sharp despite her exhaustion. Emily said, "I drew the end. But endings are not peace." Michael leaned against the steel beam, his gaze low, confession unshakable. Michael said, "I played his hand once, and my silence fed his power." His voice broke. Michael said, "I am guilty too." Sarah's fingers clutched the torn photo, now scattered in pieces at her feet. The lingering memory's presence lingered in the fragments, no longer blurred, but demanding still. Their absence was louder than the storm. The courthouse steps were crowded again, but this time no verdict thundered from inside, only whispers of shattered illusions. Sarah walked slowly down the stone stairs, her voice weary. Sarah said, "They will never say his name in truth, but we know." Daniel walked beside her, posture upright, his voice firm. Daniel said, "Justice does not live in their halls, it lives in us." Emily clutched her sketchbook close, her voice bitter but steady. Emily said, "I drew their faces, everyone that turned away." Michael stood slightly apart, hands folded, his words edged with regret. Michael said, "I cannot undo what I gave him, but I can guard what remains." Sarah paused at the last step, her gaze rising to the crowd that dispersed without care. The velvet blade was gone, but his shadow lingered in every corner of the city. The lingering memory's presence pulsed in the silence, more alive now than in life itself. By the riverbank again, fog drifting across the water, Sarah stood where it had all begun. She whispered, "Every ripple is his voice, every silence his absence." Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his words measured. Daniel said, "We carry him forward not in grief, but in defiance of those who tried to erase him." Emily tossed a sketch into the water, the paper spreading ink like veins. Emily said, "I drew him so he would never be lost again." Michael stood with arms crossed, his tone low but resolute. Michael said, "I will not let the silence consume us again." The fog thickened, curling like unseen hands pulling at the shore. Sarah knelt, fingers brushing the water's surface, her tears merging with the river. The lingering memory's reflection shimmered faintly, no longer blurred, but almost smiling. For a heartbeat, it felt like forgiveness. The small diner, once a place of whispers and fear, now felt like a graveyard of secrets. Sarah stirred her untouched coffee, voice fragile. Sarah said, "I wanted answers, but I got ashes." Daniel sat across, eyes locked on her, voice steady. Daniel said, "Ashes carry seeds too, and from ruin we choose what grows." Emily leaned against the booth window, sketchbook resting beside her. Emily said, "I will keep drawing, not to remember, but to remind." Michael stood at the counter, paying quietly, his voice soft but heavy. Michael said, "Reminders keep us honest, even when they cut deep." The diner lights flickered briefly, as if mocking the ghosts that no longer lived there. Sarah closed her eyes, her hands finally releasing the torn photograph fragments onto the table. The lingering memory's presence filled the silence once more, not haunting, but echoing, like a promise carved in quiet. Night fell across the city, but the silence no longer felt hollow. It was filled with echoes of battles fought. Sarah stood on the rooftop, letter finally opened, words trembling in her hands. Sarah whispered, "He was never gone, he was stolen. and now he has returned. Daniel stepped forward, standing beside her, voice resolute. Daniel said, "The truth belongs to no one man. It belongs to memory itself." Emily leaned against the railing, sketchbook closed at last, her tone quiet but firm. Emily said, "I drew the ending, but it is only the beginning." Michael stood behind them, his voice steady. Michael said, "We guard him now, not as a victim, but as a presence that lives in us." The velvet blade was gone, but his shadow would linger, a warning of power twisted. The lingering memory's voice filled the night air, gentle, haunting, eternal. The courtroom stood empty now, benches silent, dust settling where chaos once lived. Sarah stepped inside, her footsteps echoing. She whispered, "This is where he vanished for the second time, not in body, but in memory." Daniel stood beside her, his voice low. Daniel said, "They erased him here, but we carve him back by standing." Emily sat in the front row, sketchbook in her lap, pencil unmoving. Emily said, "There's nothing left to draw, only silence to keep alive." Michael leaned against the wall, shoulders heavy, his words rough. Michael said, "I once let silence win, but never again." Sarah placed the opened letter on the judge's bench, her hands trembling as if laying down a final offering. For a moment, the air shifted, as though the lingering memory brushed past them. The gavel on the desk rattled without touch, a sound like unfinished justice demanding to echo forever. The river glowed under the moonlight, calm now, no storm, only whispers. Sarah knelt at the bank, her hand brushing the surface gently. Sarah said, "He was here, and he is here still." Daniel stood close, his tone quiet but resolute. Daniel said, "Absence is only an illusion. Presence survives in us." Emily tossed her final sketch into the river, the paper drifting until it dissolved. Emily said, "Now he belongs to the water, not to lies." Michael's gaze stayed on the horizon, voice steady. Michael said, "We walk forward carrying him, not chasing him." The fog shifted, revealing a faint reflection of the lingering memory, no longer blurred, smiling gently. Sarah closed her eyes, tears running down, but her lips curved in fragile peace. The river carried the sketch away, as though carrying him into eternity. In the diner, only one booth light was on, casting a pool of yellow glow. Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, voice distant. Sarah said, "He should be here, laughing with us, not haunting us." Daniel leaned across the table, eyes soft. Daniel said, "He is here in every word we speak, in every silence we endure." Emily placed her sketchbook on the seat, closing it for the final time. Emily said, "This is his story now, not ours." Michael stood at the counter, his reflection in the glass fractured, his words sharp. Michael said, "Every fracture holds light, even if it scars us." Sarah laid the final fragment of the torn photograph on the table, letting it rest beneath the lamp. For a breath, the bulb flickered, and the lingering memory's face appeared fully clear on the fragment. Then it faded, leaving silence that felt whole, not broken. The city rooftop overlooked endless lights, a horizon stretching beyond grief. Sarah stood at the edge, letter in hand, voice soft. Sarah said, "He wrote of hope, not despair. He wanted us to breathe again." Daniel placed his hand on the railing, voice steady. Daniel said, "The city hums with his presence, even in its silence." Emily leaned back against the wall, sketchbook tucked under her arm like an old friend. Emily said, "I'll never draw him again, but he will draw me forever." Michael's voice was deep, firm. Michael said, "His absence taught us to listen, to hear what we ignored." Sarah opened the letter, the words finally free to the night. The wind carried its pages, scattering them across the skyline. For a moment, the pages floated, illuminated in the city lights, forming the outline of the lingering memory before dissolving into the dark. The final scene closed not with sound, but with a single haunting silence. Sarah stood in her doorway, dawn spilling pale light across her face. She whispered, He is gone, but not lost, never lost. Daniel walked past, pausing to meet her eyes. Daniel said, "The world will forget, but we never will." Emily lingered at the bottom of the steps, sketchbook gone, her voice calm. Emily said, "He is written in us now, we are his pages." Michael stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his tone heavy. Michael said, "Justice is not a verdict, it is a memory that refuses to fade." Sarah closed the door slowly, holding silence like a vow. The frame lingered on the empty street, where for an instant, the lingering memory's figure appeared, youthful and smiling, before fading into the morning light. The unanswered question remained. Did he ever leave at all?